This is the great book haul of 2020. It was painful, but necessary. Hey BookTube, it's Kim from Middle of the Book March, and I'm in a different location today to show you what used to be my dining room table. Yesterday, I spent several hours doing a book unhaul. And these piles reflect about 300 books. They go all the way back to the end of the table back there. And I did this because I had a ton of books that I read and didn't like, tons of books that I've had for a long time and knew that I lost interest in, some former library books that at the time I gobbled up and thought, oh yeah, I like this author, I like that book that I read, this looks really interesting. A lot of those I'm going to donate back because I'm not going to get to all these. And I have other books that are claiming more of my attention. So I'm going to donate a bunch of these. I'm going to give a bunch of these away to friends and clear out more space. What I had found myself doing was I was buying books and I was putting them in piles all over the place with no room in my shelves to shelve them. And I didn't like that, so hence these piles right here on my dining room table. So I moved all the little piles and stacked them all on the dining room table. Who knows when we'll be able to use this again. We did use it for Thanksgiving on Thursday, so that was a good thing. So anyway, this is my bookish week for November 28th, two days after Thanksgiving, 2020. And I finished one book this week. I thought I was going to finish two others, but I am like this close to finishing. And I wanted to make a comment. If I say that I read 3 books in 1 week, that doesn't mean I actually picked them up and from start to finish read 3 books that week. That usually means I finished 3 of the 8 books that I have ongoing. So it makes it a little bit different, but it still kind of adds to the books that I read in 1 month. But if anybody keeps track of that, I'm not particularly interested in how many books that I read every month. And I used to do the Goodreads goal, but I blew that away because it was too much pressure. I don't really want to keep track of the quantity. I want to read good books. And that's another good reason why this unhaul pile exists. So let me talk to you about the one book I did finish this week, and it was a buddy read with Scott and Nell from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, and it is The Unwomanly Face of War by Svetlana Alexievich, translated from the Russian by Richard Pavir and Larissa Volochansky. This book was published in 2017. It was originally published in Russian in 1985, so it's been around for a long time. And what this book is an oral history of Russian women serving in World War II. Now, when Scott, Nell, and I all talked about this, we had similar feelings about it. Because it's oral history, the author pretty much took all of the stories of the women and recorded them in the book form, almost as word-for-word transcripts. She offered a little bit of narrative in the front of several of the chapters, but she didn't expand in her own words very often. The thing that got a little muddy was a lot of the women's stories blended together, so it was really difficult to kind of disseminate which stories went with other stories, if there were themes with each section or each chapter. There were so many stories and so many names. Once in a while, the same woman's name would come up in a different section, but there were so many different Russian names. It wasn't really easy to keep track of a lot of the separations per chapters or per section. So they did start to blend together. There were some running themes throughout the book that were really striking to me. And the first one is, it says The Unwomanly Face of War as a subtitle, but many of these Russian young women were girls. They were young teenagers when they first joined the Russian army. And it was their determination to help serve what they called the motherland. And it was the same case for every single girl that signed up. And quite often, they had to be rejected multiple times, which drove them to secretly stow away in army train cars, in jeeps, in the backs of wagons, in order for them to take part in fighting for their country. And it was very much a sense of indoctrinated loyalty. This was young women in the 40s who wanted to join up right at the beginning of World War II when war was declared. It was interesting because many of them talked about they had no idea what war was going to be like. There was no honest feedback as to what they were going to experience, but they were determined to kill the enemy for the sake of Russian loyalty and for the motherland. When they got into the trenches, they realized what the horrors of war really meant, and not just the fact that they were killing people, but what they themselves endured on a personal level. They talked about starvation, no hygiene. There was no supplies that were made specifically for women. They had to kind of MacGyver things together in order for them to have what they needed. They weren't able to wash for weeks on end. They slept in a trench in the ground. They were subject to sexual assault. They were subject to taunts and harassment. They were also at times subject to male protection because a lot of the men that they served with looked at them as their little sisters. So it depended on which women, because the stories were wildly on a spectrum of wartime experiences. The other thing that was very striking was there were young women who were snipers, who were tank mechanics, who were pulling burning men out of tanks in order to give them medical attention. Their service ran the gamut of anything you could possibly imagine somebody doing in a wartime scenario. They did it. And by the end of the book, there was a lot of conversation about what happened to them as they returned home. Some women were received as heroes. Some women were completely rejected by their communities. Some were ostracized, humiliated, taunted, looked down on, that they weren't real women. Many of them immediately tried to get married and have children in order to wash away the trauma and the memories of war, to kind of get back to what it meant to be a female in Russian society. It was fascinating. It was a good book, but I didn't love it, mostly because of the organization of it. And a lot of the stories seemed to overlap and seemed to blend. A lot of the information was not new, based on previous history that I've read or documentaries. So a lot of this wasn't surprising. There were some grim, horrific moments in the book. So it's not an easy book. It's not easy to realize that this is reality. This is real life and what happened during that war. But it was a great experience with Scott and Al. Thank you very much. And I hope we do another buddy read going forward. Had a lot of fun getting to know you both. And so that was my experience with that book. Now I have 3 other books that I am two that I'm almost done with, this close to being done with, and 1 other book. All 3 of them are buddy reads. So the first one, as you've heard me talk about since Victober, is George Eliot's Daniel Duranda. Alba and I have been reading this starting in Victober, so it's going on 2 months. I will finish this today. I think I have 30 pages left to go. I'm not going to do a lot of conversation about this book in this video, but the only thing I will say is this is a book that speaks to why I'm a reader. This is exceptional. And Alba and I have talked about next year reading the rest of George Eliot's novels. We buddy read Middlemarch in March, and we're finishing this one. She has since purchased a book on George Eliot's attitudes and thoughts towards Judaism, and I have since purchased a biography of George Eliot, and we're both going to continue to read up on her. Again, Middlemarch is one of my favorite books, and this is a very close second. So I'll talk more about that at the end of next week. My other buddy read that I'm going to be finishing very soon in this, that's all I have left to go, is Human X by Han Kang. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I'm reading this with Lindsay from Lindsay's Book Life. And it's a very slim novel, but because of the Thanksgiving holiday, we kind of got extended off track a little bit, which is totally fine. This is a fictional account of the student uprisings in South Korea in the 1980s. Han Kang is a professor and somewhat of a political activist. This novel is fictionalizing different characters that were involved in that student uprising. It's kind of a great example of interlinked chapters and characters that jump from chapter to chapter. So you read their own perspectives. Some of the complexities of the book are that the author tends to change perspective. The first chapter started off in second person perspective, and then the second chapter was first person, the third chapter was third person, and she flips back and forth between those perspectives. That was a little complicated, and it caused me to slow down my reading to make sure I was tracking correctly. This is a book about humans' acts towards other humans, both good and evil. And she discusses violence, a lot of death, a lot of persecution. It's an incredibly grim, horrific, gruesome book to read. This is not for the delicate or sensitive reader. Avoid this. But the translation is incredible. It is translated by Deborah Smith, I believe, and she also translated Kang's novel, The Vegetarian. Let's see. Yeah, Deborah Smith, who also wrote a pretty good but brief introduction about the history of the student uprisings in 1980. The translation is gorgeous, and the language is beautiful and violent and full of so much depth that in 200 pages, I think it's an exceptional book. So I'm going to probably finish this weekend and talk about that again at the end of next week. And the other buddy read I'm doing is Little Constructions by Anna Burns. I am doing this buddy read with Amelia Reads. And again, with Thanksgiving and work schedules, we kind of extended this out. We were going to be finished by the end of next week, but we're going to go another 2 weeks just to give ourselves a little cushion and a little grace, because come on, we can't shove everything in such a short amount of time. This is a book that was published in 2007 originally in the UK, and it was just reprinted in the US. Recently, I think I picked this up, early this year? I don't remember. Those kind of details don't really matter. You guys don't care about that. But this is a book about a town in Ireland called Tiptoe Floorboard. And it discusses the family of Irish mobsters and so many different family members and what their dynamics are, how they interact with the townspeople and different characters. It's incredibly funny, but below the humor lies a lot of violence and trauma and criminal activity, and it's really, really good. It's the writing style, it's Anna Burns, so the writing style is fairly complicated. I can see where she developed her style that she wrote in Milkman. So this is kind of an early example of her crafting that type of language that she uses and how she wrote the novel Milkman. And it's not exactly the same. It's got a narrator, an omniscient narrator, which if I know in advance that a book has a narrator like that or second person, I tend to appreciate and avoid. But I picked this one up clearly because it's Anna Burns and she's a favorite of mine. So far so good. It's very darkly funny, and we're going to continue this for the next 2 weeks. So I do have other books on the go, all the same as I've been talking about for weeks. These Truths by Jill Lepore. I am still reading Jane Eyre. I hope to finish that next week. I would love to finish it by mid next week. and I'm clearing the docket for December reading. Once I finish Jane Eyre, I'm going to continue on my couple of books project, and I will pick up Jean Rhys's The Wide Sargasso Sea. Whew, there's a lot going on, and it's holiday season and all kinds of stuff. Maybe during the week next week, I'm going to show you that I actually have a TBR pile for December. It is the first time in history I have concretely put myself on a schedule for books I want to finish in December. I am beside myself that I did it, but I kept thinking about, I want to read this one, I want to read this one, I have this one to read for book group, I have this one to read for the Barter Hordes book club, so I'll show you that pile next week, and we'll see how it goes. That's it. I'd like to see my dining room table soon underneath all of this chaos. We'll see how long that takes me. Hopefully by my next video next week, this will be gone, and I'll show you a picture if it is. Hope you guys have had a great reading week. Write a comment down below about anything you heard me talk about in this video. Whatever you want to talk about. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.